The vast emptiness of space stretched before Outpost Horizon, a small human settlement perched on the edge of known territories. Lieutenant J. Park stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the dark expanse, watching and waiting. Yuna Kim, the communication officer, sat at her station, her fingers dancing across holographic displays. The outpost hummed with a quiet tension, a subtle electricity that spoke of preparedness rather than fear. "Incoming vessels," Yuna announced, her voice calm and professional. Multiple signatures detected at the outer perimeter. Jay moved closer to the observation window. Silver specks began to materialize against the black backdrop of space Zarkonian scout ships. Their angular design was unmistakable, sharp and predatory like metal sharks hunting unsuspecting prey. The colony had been expecting them. Not these exact ships, perhaps, but something like them. Humanity had learned long ago that space was not a peaceful playground but a battlefield of survival. Jay tapped a series of commands into the communication panel. Defensive systems began to hum to life, not with panic, but with a calculated readiness. Automated turrets calibrated their targeting systems. Energy shields flickered momentarily, testing their protective capabilities. "Scan their approach vectors," Jay instructed Yuna. "I want to know exactly what we're dealing with." The scout ships moved with a practiced formation, believing themselves to be the hunters. They did not realize they were sailing into a carefully prepared trap. Below the observation deck, technicians and combat specialists moved with precision. Their movements were synchronized, each person knowing their exact role. Years of training and preparation had led to this moment. Sensors began picking up more detailed information about the approaching vessels. Their weapon signatures, hull compositions, and energy outputs were quickly analyzed by the outpost's advanced AI systems. "They're underestimating us," Yuna said, a hint of a smile crossing her face. It wasn't arrogance, but a simple observation of tactical reality. Jay nodded. The Zarkonians had a reputation for viewing other species as inferior, especially those they considered technologically underdeveloped. They would soon learn the error of their assumptions. The first scout ships were now close enough to visually distinguish. Their metallic hulls gleamed, reflecting the distant starlight. They moved with a confident swagger, like predators certain of their impending victory. "Activate perimeter defense protocols," Jay commanded. Beneath the surface of the outpost, a complex network of defensive systems began to engage. Quantum-locked energy barriers, adaptive camouflage technologies, and intelligent tracking systems prepared themselves. The Zarkonian ships were about to discover that this was no ordinary frontier colony. This was a carefully constructed fortress, designed to turn potential invasion into a catastrophic mistake. Yuna's screens began filling with incoming data. Weapon systems were charging, targeting computers were calculating potential strike zones, and communication channels were being monitored and prepared for potential jamming. Jay watched the approaching ships with a calm, analytical gaze. Years of military training had taught him that battles were won long before the first shot was fired. Preparation, strategy, and unexpected capabilities were the true weapons of war. "They're entering effective weapons range," Yuna reported. The first Zarkonian scout ships began to adjust their approach, seemingly unaware that every movement was being tracked, analyzed, and countered before they could even consider an attack. Humanity had learned from countless conflicts. They had evolved, adapted, and prepared. And now, on this quiet outpost at the edge of explored space, those lessons were about to be demonstrated in the most dramatic way possible. The stage was set. The players were in position. And the Zarkonian invasion was about to become a lesson they would never forget. The first wave of Zarkonian dropships descended like metallic raindrops, their hulls gleaming with confidence. Captain Juan Seo watched from the underground command center, his hands steady on the tactical interface. The ground around Outpost Horizon seemed peaceful, rolling rocky terrain with sparse vegetation. But beneath this calm surface, a complex network of defensive systems waited. As the dropships touched down, their massive doors began to open. Zarkonian soldiers moved with practiced military precision, their powered armor reflecting the dim light. They expected a quick conquest, a simple territorial takeover. They were wrong. The moment the first squad stepped onto the rocky ground, hidden sensors activated. Electromagnetic pulses burst from underground emplacements, creating invisible waves of technological disruption. The Zarkonian soldiers' advanced combat suits suddenly flickered and died. Communication systems went silent. Weapon systems became useless chunks of complex machinery. The soldiers found themselves suddenly vulnerable, their technological superiority stripped away in milliseconds. From strategic hidden positions, human defensive turrets emerged. These were not ordinary weapons. Designed with adaptive AI targeting systems, they could track and neutralize threats with surgical precision. The first Zarkonian squad found themselves under a rain of precision energy bursts. Juan's voice remained calm through the communication network. Maintain defensive positions. Do not engage directly unless necessary. The Zarkonian soldiers tried to regroup. Their training had prepared them for conventional warfare, for battles where technology and firepower determined victory. But this was different. This was a battlefield where human creativity turned every disadvantage into an unexpected weapon. Robotic defense drones began to emerge from hidden compartments in the rocky terrain. Small, agile, and completely unpredictable. They moved like hunting animals, using terrain and strategic positioning to maximum effect. The Zarkonian commander attempted to rally his troops. But each communication attempt was blocked, each movement tracked and countered before it could become an actual threat. Underground tunnels, which the Zarkonians believed were simple maintenance passages, became complex combat routes. Human defenders could move unseen, strike quickly, and disappear before the Imperial troops could respond. Some Zarkonian soldiers began to realize they were not fighting a simple colony defense. They were fighting a complex, living system that seemed to anticipate their every move. Energy shields flickered to life around critical outpost sections. These were not standard defensive barriers, but adaptive systems that could redistribute energy, change frequency, and effectively become almost impossible to penetrate. Within 30 minutes of landing, the first Zarkonian invasion wave had been completely neutralized. Not through massive firepower, but through intelligent, calculated resistance. Juan watched the tactical displays. Each red marker representing a Zarkonian unit slowly turned gray, neutralized, captured, or rendered completely ineffective. The Imperial troops had come expecting an easy victory. They were leaving with a harsh lesson about underestimating an opponent. As the remaining dropships attempted retreat, automated defense systems tracked their movements. Not to destroy, but to demonstrate the total control the human defenders possessed. One by one, the Zarkonian ships found their systems compromised. Navigation became impossible. Weapon systems remained locked. They were effectively floating targets, unable to advance or retreat. The message was clear: this was not a conquest. This was a demonstration. By the time the first wave of invasion ended, the Zarkonian military had lost more than equipment. They had lost their sense of technological superiority. They had encountered an enemy that fought not with brute force, but with intelligence, preparation, and an almost supernatural ability to turn technology against its masters. Juan allowed himself a small smile. The first battle was over. And humanity had made its point perfectly clear. In the quiet control room of Outpost Horizon, Park studied the communication intercepts with a calculated precision. Each captured Zarkonian transmission was more than just data, it was a weapon. The Imperial communication networks were surprisingly vulnerable. Years of technological arrogance had made them complacent. Sue understood that true warfare was not just about destroying bodies, but breaking spirits. Reports began to spread through Zarkonian communication channels. Whispers of an enemy that seemed to know their movements before they happened. Stories of entire squads disappearing without a trace. Tales of weapons that could shut down advanced technology with a mere electronic breath. Some Zarkonian soldiers spoke of ghosts, human defenders who could walk through walls, who appeared and disappeared like shadows. Others described technology so advanced it seemed like magic. Sue and his team carefully cultivated these rumors. They strategically leaked partially true information, mixed with just enough exaggeration to make the stories more terrifying. Each transmission was designed to create maximum psychological impact. The Imperial troops began to change. Confidence turned to uncertainty. Aggressive postures became defensive crouch. The mighty Zarkonian military started to fear an enemy they could not understand. Intercepted communications revealed growing panic. Junior officers questioned their commanders. Soldiers began to request retreat protocols. The invasion momentum was collapsing not through direct combat, but through psychological manipulation. Holographic projections were strategically deployed. Brief, terrifying glimpses of human capabilities that seemed to defy conventional understanding. A dropship would suddenly see a weapon system that shouldn't exist. A communication channel would briefly show impossible technological demonstrations. These were not just military tactics. They were psychological surgical strikes. The Zarkonian military command structure began to fracture. Trust dissolved. Each soldier started to see potential threats in every shadow, every technological signal, every unexpected movement. Su's team tracked these psychological shifts with scientific precision. They were not just defending a colony. They were conducting a masterclass in psychological warfare. Reports started circulating about human defenders who could hack any system instantaneously. Stories spread about weapons that could disable entire fleets with a single signal. Rumors suggested that humans could predict Zarkonian military movements before they were even planned. Some of these stories were true. Many were carefully constructed exaggerations. But their effectiveness was total. The Imperial troops who had arrived expecting a simple conquest now found themselves trapped in a nightmare of uncertainty. Every technological advantage they believed they possessed now seemed like a potential weakness. Zarkonian communication networks became channels of fear. Soldiers shared increasingly bizarre and terrifying stories about the human defenders. Each story grew more elaborate, more impossible, and more believable. Military discipline began to crumble. The invasion force that had arrived with surgical precision now moved with hesitation and fear. They were no longer conquering. They were surviving. Su watched the psychological battlefield with a calm, analytical eye. Warfare was not just about destroying enemies. It was about making them destroy themselves. The human defenders of Outpost Horizon had turned their biggest perceived weakness, being a small, seemingly insignificant colony, into their greatest strength. The Zarkonians had walked into a trap designed not just with technology, but with pure human creativity. By the time the psychological operation reached its peak, the invasion was already lost. Not through military defeat, but through the most powerful weapon humanity possessed, the ability to make an enemy fear what they do not understand. The Zarkonian military would remember this day. Not as a battle, but as a nightmare from which they could not awaken. Admiral Un Lee stood on the bridge of the flagship, her eyes fixed on the holographic display showing the Zarkonian fleet. The space around Outpost Horizon had become a chessboard, and humanity was about to make its most decisive move. The Imperial ships moved with what they believed was tactical superiority. They did not realize they were walking into a carefully prepared trap that had been years in the making. Hidden quantum communication networks activated. Stealth ships that had been waiting silently began to move into position. These were not ordinary vessels, but advanced platforms designed with technologies that would redefine space warfare. The first wave of human counterattack began with something unexpected. Massive electromagnetic pulses spread across the battlefield, creating zones of technological chaos. Zarkonian ships found their most advanced systems suddenly becoming useless chunks of metal. Adaptive AI combat systems came online. Each human ship became a living, thinking weapon. They moved not as individual vessels, but as a single, intelligent organism. Targeting systems predicted Zarkonian movements before their commanders could even think of them. Energy weapons unlike anything the Imperial fleet had seen before began to strike. These were not simple laser attacks, but quantum-locked projectiles that could reshape the very structure of matter. A single shot could turn a battleship into atomic dust. The Zarkonian fleet commander watched in horror as his most advanced ships became vulnerable. Communication networks collapsed. Weapon systems failed. Their technological superiority became their greatest weakness. Human ships moved with a fluidity that defied traditional combat logic. They were not just fighting. They were dancing across the battlefield, each movement calculated with mathematical precision. Defensive shields that the Zarkonians believed were impenetrable began to dissolve. Adaptive weapon frequencies found every weak point, every potential vulnerability. It was like watching a surgeon precisely dissect an opponent. Small drone swarms emerged from hidden launch bays. Thousands of intelligent, interconnected units that could think and react faster than any traditional military system. They swarmed Zarkonian ships like intelligent metal insects, finding and exploiting every possible weakness. The battle was not about destruction. It was about demonstration. Each human ship carried technologies that seemed to break the fundamental rules of space combat. Quantum entanglement communication systems allowed instantaneous coordination. Adaptive camouflage made vessels virtually invisible until the moment of attack. Zarkonian commanders watched their tactical displays in disbelief. Entire squadrons disappeared. Weapon systems became useless. Their mighty Imperial fleet was being systematically dismantled without a single direct confrontation. Admiral Lee's voice remained calm through the communication network. Maintain precision. Show them exactly what humanity is capable of. The turning point came not through massive explosions, but through a clinical, almost surgical dismantling of the Imperial fleet. Each Zarkonian ship was neutralized with a precision that seemed almost mathematical. Survival was no longer an option for the invasion force. Retreat became impossible. The human defenders had turned the entire battlefield into their own carefully constructed trap. As the last Zarkonian vessels were disabled, a clear message was sent. This was not just a defense. This was a warning. Humanity was not a civilization to be trifled with. The space around Outpost Horizon became a graveyard of Imperial ambitions. Disabled ships drifted silently, a testament to a battle that had been lost before it had even truly begun. Admiral Lee watched the final tactical displays. The invasion was over. The message was clear. Humanity would defend its territories. And the cost of underestimating them would be total. The turning point had been reached. And the galaxy would never be the same again. The surviving Zarkonian ships limped through the cold darkness of space, their once proud fleet reduced to broken fragments. Communication channels crackled with a desperate message that would echo through Imperial networks for generations. Grand Commander Rail, the highest-ranking survivor, recorded a transmission that would become legendary across the Zarkonian Empire. His voice trembled with a mixture of fear and disbelief. They are not a colony, the message warned. They are a weapon. Humanity is not a civilization to be conquered. Humanity is a force of nature. Back at Outpost Horizon, Lieutenant J. Park watched the retreating ships with a calm expression. The colony looked peaceful, almost unremarkable. But beneath the rocky terrain and simple structures lay the most advanced defensive system in known space. Diplomatic channels began to activate. Not as a plea for mercy, but as a calculated demonstration of strength. The human settlement was revealing itself to be far more than a simple frontier outpost. It was a carefully constructed forward operating base with technologies that could reshape the balance of galactic power. Imperial communication networks became flooded with the story of the failed invasion. Each transmission carried the same warning: stay away. Do not approach. Humanity is not what you believe. The battle had lasted less than 48 hours. But its impact would be felt for decades. Intelligence reports began to circulate through Zarkonian space. Detailed analyses of the human defensive capabilities began to paint a terrifying picture. This was not a random colony. This was a carefully prepared stronghold that had been waiting for exactly this moment. Survivors told stories that sounded more like nightmares. Weapons that could think. Defensive systems that seemed to predict movement before it happened. Technology that seemed to break the fundamental rules of physics. The Zarkonian Empire's military leadership went into emergency session. Entire strategy committees were disbanded. New protocols were established. The approach to human territories would forever be changed. What had begun as a simple territorial invasion had become a watershed moment in galactic history. Humanity had demonstrated that technological superiority was not about raw power, but about intelligent adaptation. Diplomatic channels opened, but with a clear underlying message. This was not a negotiation. This was a warning. The human settlement continued its operations as if nothing had happened. No celebrations. No displays of victory. Just a calm, calculated continuation of daily activities. Intelligence analysts across multiple star systems began to study the battle records. Universities created entire research departments dedicated to understanding what had happened. How could a small colony defeat an imperial invasion force so completely? The answer was simple, yet complex. Preparation. Creativity. An understanding that warfare was more about intelligence than brute force. Surviving Zarkonian soldiers were debriefed. Their stories became a mixture of terror and impossible details. Weapons that could think. Defensive systems that seemed to predict movement before it happened. Technology that seemed to break the fundamental rules of physics. No one would believe the full story. But everyone would remember the warning. Humanity is not what you think, the transmissions repeated. Approach with caution. The frontier colony of Outpost Horizon became more than a location. It became a symbol. A warning. A demonstration of what humanity could become when pushed. As the last Imperial ships disappeared into the darkness, one message remained clear. This was not the end of the conflict. This was just the beginning. The galaxy had learned a lesson. Humanity was not to be underestimated. And the warning would spread faster than any weapon. Faster than any ship. Faster than any technology. Run, the message said. Just run.